Well, thank you for tuning in. This is Doug Ravi, Tentative Meeting IL, coming to you in a recorded format. This is not going to be live. This is pre recorded based on this is the week of coming up on Mardi Gras. And I'm recording these ahead of time. It'll be one at a time like normal, but it's not a live feed. So I'm not really going to edit it. I'm going to keep it normal like I normally would do. Just understanding the clothing is not going to change from episode to episode. Okay, I'm not going to do all that. It's 9:22 p.m. at night. So I wanted to take an opportunity. Um, who is this guy? Who is this guy that keeps coming at you and teaching and preaching and giving the invitation to be born again at the end of the message? And sometimes he does serious, sometimes he doesn't, and I see him in crowds sometimes and so forth. But who the heck is he? What's his background? Why should I listen to him? Or why do I not listen to him? Whatever, all of that stuff. Well, let's see if we can add uh, some clarity and some pull back the shade a little bit. Know who you're laboring with, right? So that's part of this. So um, so I just pray this comes through well. Obviously, there'll be no scripture on this, right? Because this is my testimony. This is I'm not going to go day by day, of course, but hitting the high points. It's going to take about um, 4 sessions or so to do this. I've got to jot it down the best I can, and we're not going to cover every single detail. Some details in my testimony, there's a few that are just they're just not public. They don't need to be public, and that's fine. It's and it's not necessarily a protection of me. It's also a protection of other people who they just it's not their testimony. It's mine, right? So there's no reason to bring them up in it and risk any embarrassment or anything else like that. So that's just how we're going to deal with that. But anyway, yeah. So who's Doug? Um, Last name is Ravi. Just get that out of the way. Rawe. Um, it is pronounced Ravi. So the W is pronounced like a V. So like Volkswagen, in case you've ever heard that. It's supposed to be German. But it's so it's Doug Ravi, and I don't go by Douglas. I do, um, but it's Doug. So I'm 49 now. I'll be turning 50 later on this year. So I was born in 1975. Um, and who am I? Who am I? Where to come from? Well, I hail from originally from Carrollton, Illinois. Went to school there, and literally born. Well, was born one of the last babies born in Carrollton Boyd Hospital in Carrollton. There, they now would affectionately call it. Maybe some would call it the Band Aid Station, but nonetheless, it is what it is. It's a small country hospital. Most things go from there. You either go directly to Jerseyville or they send you somewhere else. Whatever the case is, that's fine. It's they can still uh, hopefully keep you alive to some degree if something's going on. But we're not talking about them right now. So anyway, I was born and raised in Carrollton. I was born and raised. My dad, a hard worker, ended up during, I would say, from the time I was, let's say, 8, 9, 10 in those ranges, till I was about 14, 15 ish, struggled with getting work. Now, if he had work, if he could find it, he was there. He was there on time, before time, work harder and work circles around men half his age. Um, the problem was my dad was just not very educated, and he did not have a high school diploma nor a GED really. So sometimes he just wasn't really given a chance. But that being said, so we were raised probably socioeconomically probably poverty level, if not maybe a stitch above it. Okay. Um, I sometimes jokingly say, and this is not a slam on my family, this is where I came from. We jokingly say many times, didn't know milk came in a jug. Powdered milk and, whatever it was. So, didn't starve to death. I didn't starve to death. We always had clothes on our back, food on our tummy. Um, the, the house was mostly warm when it needed to be and mostly cool when it needed to be. And rain was not coming in. So, I mean, we were clean. We did what we needed to do. We were okay. But doing that, one of the first vices of my life growing up is for it. I've always been a sound sleeper, even to this day. Once I crash, it's done until my body wakes me up, or whatever the case is. I doing that very deep sleep patterns. Um, I had a problem with, and I don't talk about this very much. Had a problem with bedwetting later, much later than I should have, and that caused some social issues growing up because of course, I would have a smell, right, and this would of course cause kids to not want to be around me, and I think I've always been a social butterfly, so maybe of sorts I didn't know how to handle that. So and of course, my dad really didn't emotionally know how to handle that the best. So, instead of, well, and again, we're not here to pick on somebody else or anything else. It's just where I've come from. I did, of course, eventually outgrow all that. I'd say about my early teens, um, but it left a mark. It left emotional scar. It left hurt, and you know, um, some strong leaning towards some depression of sorts, right? As we're growing up. On top of that, when I would have been 8 or 9, well, probably about 8. So I think it was in second grade, whatever age you are in second grade. Um, in the wintertime, and I'm not real sure how much this has to do with anything, but I just put it out there. I had almost died. Um, I had gotten, I was out in the front yard playing football. It's about late September, so getting dark time, so it's about 50 degrees or so, right? A little cooler, and of course playing football, and I got cold. I should say I got hot from sweating, right? So we take our shirts off, and it's 50 degrees outside, so the sweat turned cold. And later on that night, my older brother tried to medicate all these things. He did things the best he could, but I ended up getting a really bad case of croup. So croup, if you want to look it up, sometime you can. Um, Croup is the exact opposite of asthma. So, and I don't remember which one does what, but one of them is restriction of the airflow going out. One of them is restriction of the airflow going in, right? And I had the one opposite of asthma. So that's as the doctor described it. But it was bad enough. I woke up in the middle of the night and literally could not breathe. I was like, I was like literally there was a blockage in my throat, and I was able to wake up my younger brother. He got my mom, and she had just learned CPR. If she had not known CPR, if she had not learned CPR, literally we're talking less than a month prior to this happening, I would not be talking to you today. I would not have made it. Um, she did CPR as my dad got ready. We lived 8.5 miles out in the country, so mom's keeping me alive. You know, mouth to mouth, all of this stuff, keep me alive. I remember that night. Now I was very young, of course, but I remember slight moments of coming to, just enough oxygen getting to my brain to keep me going. I'd go back under. I'd go back under. Right. And finally, we got there to the ER. The doctor's doing all he can do, and I remember them fighting me, keeping me in this oxygen tent, trying to get air into me. And I believe the doctor was Dr. Parkhan. He's now recently passed on. I think I don't know how recent was, but nonetheless, he had told my mom and dad later that he was preparing mentally. I'm getting ready to cut and put the tube down to where he can breathe. And finally, I came to. Finally, I came to. Got up. I do recall this. Sitting up in the middle of the bed, I asked for water. I got some water, drank some water, and just I blew up. I'm not trying to be gross, but blew up stuff everywhere. He said, "Well, there was whatever. That was the problem, or whatever the case was." So, again, this is I've been like 8 years old then, so this is like 41 years ago. Hazy memory at best on some of these details. So, so that is my growing up. It wasn't the best of times, but we had family and so forth, and you know there was senses of love, even though sometimes you didn't always feel like you got it when you needed it from certain points. That's not throwing any blame game or throwing any shade. None of us come from perfect backgrounds. None of us come from perfect examples of having Jude and Ward Cleaver as your mom and dad. Just no, it just doesn't happen, right? But going forward, um, during those same times, and I would say um, some of that was after. We'll spin back just a little bit, and I've talked about this before. Was is my grandpa's church. This is of course, one of the fundamental um, parts of my life growing up. My grandpa, so we lived in Carrollton, and his church, it was called the Gospel Crusade. It was out in Walkerville, in Illinois. So if you're familiar with that area, if you know where Carrollton is, if you do, you go due north. And right before you hit Whitehall on the left, there's going to be a sign that says Walkerville to the left. You turn left there, and you just keep going. And out there, it's all wooded now. You wouldn't know it if you wouldn't know something was there unless you knew it was there beforehand. His little church, it was actually right around the corner from another church that's still there called Walkerville Baptist. And Walkerville Baptist used to have a chain, a W chain, standing for Walkerville, I assume, in their yard by their driveway. Well, if you went around that corner, there used to be around the second. So if you went around this last corner, the road went down. If you went around, there's now a large wooded area right here. Well, that wooded area didn't used to be there. There used to be an old an old farm type house, and at one time there were two trailers butted up against each other, making a double wide trailer. Well, they lived in the double wide trailer. There's what they call the breezeway connecting the two, where you didn't have to come out of one to go into the other, but instead you had the breezeway between them. And of course, the old house was their house, and they ended up. At one time, they lived in the house, but then they moved out of the house for the trailers, and the house became the church. And it was nothing fancy, just a church, right? You wouldn't have known it was a church necessarily. There was no steeple, no anything. It looked like a house, but there was a sign out in the front yard that said Gospel Crusade on it. And what we would do is when we were young, my mom played piano for the church and so forth. That classic thing. And what we would do is we'd go to church in the mornings on a Sunday. And some of us have heard that phrase, the all day meeting, right? Well, literally, we did that. We would get there. We'd go on a Sunday morning church service. There'd be, of course, Sunday school in the morning. Then we'd come in, we'd have songs, and my grandpa would preach. And we would then, in the middle of that day, we'd go over. We'd spend the day with Grandma and Grandpa. We'd eat there. We'd change into some different clothes if we remembered all that stuff, to where we could play or whatever we could do during the day. And then around 5 p.m. or so, we'd say, all right, it's time to go back to church. We'd go over to the little breezeway. We'd walk through, and we'd be right there. Now, there were other people in the church, but the direct family, we always stayed there, and it was always understood. No worries, right? It's just we did it to save the cost of money of driving all the way home just to come all the way back. So that's what we did on a Sunday. So we never knew what our house looked like on a Sunday. You know what I mean? We were literally there we'd leave the house at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we'd get home after 8:30 at night on a Sunday. As a matter of fact, if we didn't get naps, like me, if I didn't get a nap, I many times would fall asleep in the middle of Sunday night church, right? And my dad would have to pick me up and carry me over to this bed that Grandma and Grandpa had set up for us younger ones, and we'd just fall asleep. And it was a fond memory of any sort. So my dad wasn't. My dad just had his challenges and his weak spots, like we all do, right? We all have them. Nobody is perfect. So I don't blame him for what he did or did not do. I've received healing on that. I'm good, right? So, but all that being said, so in that during that time, my grandpa's church, um, it's when I first now understanding that my grandfather, that church would have stopped when I was 8 years old. I believe 8 years old. That's when he would have passed on. So during that time, so 5, 6, and 7 years of age, maybe even before, I experienced the power of God and the presence of God before I really even knew what that meant, before I even knew what it was. All I knew is I loved it. So there was a song, and I've talked about this before. There was a song in the hymns. That's what we used, the Pentecostal hymnal book. It was a Pentecostal church. Um, and there was a song, page 17, for anyone who knows what I'm talking about, Melodies of Praise. And it was I Would Not Be Denied. And I don't know to this day why or how or anything else about that song on why it would do to me what it did to me. But Sunday nights would be request nights. So my mom wouldn't have a set list necessarily. Not saying anything wrong with that, but she wouldn't. That's just not how we functioned. She would pick a song, pick another song, and then finally say, anybody else got a song out there? And somebody just shout out a song, we'd just go with it. Well, I would sit there at my young age, I'd be jumping up and down in my seat. We had like theater seats, so the seats sprung. I'd be jumping up and down. And my mom would like, yes, Doug? Because there was never a question what I was going to pick. I knew what I was going to pick. She knew what I was going to pick. And I could see sometimes as she would literally say, is there anybody else who's got one? Nope, nobody else. I'm just in there bouncing. I seem to remember there were a few times where she would just start playing the song. She knew what song I was going to pick. And she would play. It was a faster beat song, but that song would play. And the power of God would just hit me. The presence of God would just hit me. And I would just weep. I would just, kind of like I do today. And it was just God. It was just God touching me, and I never understood it. All I knew was I loved it. That's all I could tell you. I mean, 6, 7, and 8. I don't know. I just know what I'm feeling, right? And but that was a part of this, and it was and of sorts what it did is after my grandpa passed and the church dissolved and so forth. And unfortunately, our family as a whole, we did not necessarily commit or were driven to find another church after that. Why? I don't really know. I mean, sometimes people don't talk about things, and that's fine. That's something they have to work out. But for me, what it did is it caused a desire and a draw toward, and I won't say the supernatural. At that time in my life, it was the paranormal, right? So I had a draw toward ghosts and psychics and all of this stuff. I just had this. Anytime that was on TV or Unsolved Mysteries came on, I wanted to watch it. I was like, what is this about? What is this about? And but it created a draw for that. Now, in that, what it did, I believe it caused even more so. I was always a timid individual. It caused me to be even more that way because what I would do is the things I was interested in, paranormal. Who who else your age is at that time? Maybe today's different, definitely different, but we're talking in the you know the mid to late '80s into the early and mid '90s, right? Um, kids my age in there, I mean, they're looking at football and basketball, and I'm looking for ghosts and psychics and all this stuff. What? What? You're weird. Whatever. So it caused me to kind of blend in the background. And of course, with my other problems I talked about earlier, um, I had to blend in with kids who didn't fit in because the popular kids didn't want to blend in with me. Um, of course, when you are already a bit ostracized by things that are a little beyond your control, as we mentioned before, um, when you're ostracized, you also lack some social development that you're not getting from being around other accepted kids, right? So you have to be around the other socially awkward kids who also don't blend in. So now you get a bunch of kids who aren't blending in together that are blending in with each other. Where does that go? Right? And where that went was I just kind of stuck to myself of sorts. I had no problem just disappearing in my own little self, and I'm just here to get done what I need to get done. I'm not striving for anything different, whatever the case is. A wallflower, you know. I'm just gonna keep to myself and just get the grades I need to get out and be done with it. And through these things, you know, I knew God was there as I began to get older and older. Um, the really the thirst for the paranormal began to teeter toward the supernatural because again I always knew that that God was there of sorts, right? I knew almost all of the gospel, which we'll touch on that later on. I knew that Jesus came. I knew that he laid down his life for me. I know that he's sitting at the right hand of the Father. I knew all these things. Um, I mean, because if I had quoted everything scripture and verse, what was I as versed with the word as I am maybe now, or I will be in 5 years from now? No, no, not even close. But I knew these things in here, right? And part of the challenge for me is I really had, with the fact of my dad being at times could be emotionally distant and not able to connect and so forth, and my mom was able to connect with us better, but but she worked a lot of afternoons and evenings, sometimes overnight, so she wasn't always there as much as you would like to her have been there. Now that's not blaming her. We're no one. I'm not. No one is ever by their kids every time, looking back, every time that they actually needed them. No one is. They can't be. You can't be. It's impossible, right? So it's never a blame. It's you do as a parent, and I've learned this the hard way, you do the best you can with what you have to do with. And you have to trust God with the rest of it. And I know my mom and my dad both did that because they did it the best that they could with what they had. All right. So there's no blame. There's just, you know what? It's just how life happens, and that's where grace comes in, right? So, so we see that, and all these things come together. My wife asked me about that one time if I felt like I'd be the same person I was if the things in my life hadn't happened the way they were happening. No, I don't think I would be, because everything has happened in my life to cause me to have to lean on Him in those weak areas, right? No one's dealt with a full hand. No one is, right? No one has that that best hand ever, every single hand. It just doesn't happen that way. So in that, so we go forward, going forward into our high school years here now. My junior year of high school, things really began to turn to the plus. My junior year of high school, um, had one of my great uncles, not my great uncle, but a good uncle of mine. He's still around today. My uncle Paul Williams. Still, he lives in Jerseyville still. Still serving the Lord. He was led to come to my house. He came up to our house in Carrollton from the, let's call it the New Delhi area. I'm not sure exactly where he lived, as in what the name of the town was. I believe it was New Delhi. He came up to our house 3 times. 3 separate occurrences. He drove up on a Saturday. He just, later on, I found out he was just led to do it. And he came up and he just comes up and says, "Hey, can I sit down and have coffee?" We're all like, "Sure." He was just a chatty cat. He just liked to visit. And I don't know now if he was actually led to come talk to me, but I know I was drawn to him. And he starts talking about church. And he starts talking about the things of God. And he does this over a course of, I think it's 2 weeks in a row. He does it literally 2 Saturdays in a row. On the third Saturday, he comes up, and he comes in, I'm just sitting right by him. Everybody else is kind of watch TV, whatever. I'm sitting right by him. I'm just listening and listening and listening. He's just feeding. I'm just listening. He knew I'm sucking. I'm just pulling everything from him. And finally, looks at me. He's like, "Would you like to come to church?" I'm like, "Yeah." I look over at my dad, who's over at the kitchen counter, pouring a cup of coffee. "Hey, Dad, can I go to church with Uncle Paul?" My dad, again, remember he passed away back in July, and I've shared this story a few times with him before before he left. He looks. He doesn't even look at me. He's pouring the coffee. He says, "I don't care what you do." I look at my Uncle Paul. "Yes, I'll come." So my Uncle Paul proceeds, for the next several weeks and months. Next several weeks and months. So I was a junior in high school at this time. I'm going to say junior. I think that's right about where I was. And he proceeds to drive up from the New Delhi, which, again, New Delhi is going to be, I believe it's between Godfrey and Jerseyville. He's driving up to our house in Carrollton to pick me up for church, drive all the way back down. The church was actually in Godfrey. We would drive down there. We'd have church, and then it was a morning and a night service. Church in the morning. He would take me to his house, gave me a Bible to read. I read Genesis in one day. He fed me, took care of me like he was his own kid. And then, of course, we went back to church that night, Sunday night. And then he would bring me home. And he did that faithfully. And in that, sorry, I got lost track here where I'm at here. um, in that, several weeks in, and we're coming close to the end of this session here. Coming close, um, I ended up getting a little lazy. Um, there was a now. First things first. I'm not a night owl. I would most rather be up at 5 in the morning than I would be up till midnight at night. Right. Um, and for some reason, I'm junior in high school, and all of a sudden, I decided to stay up late a couple of times. Okay. So now, understanding, I'm going to backtrack just for a moment. My dad, um, he had a role for us or a rule for us. If you went into town to do a football game or whatever, you went into town, you found your way home. In a way, teaching us to be resourceful, but nonetheless, that's what his role was. So my uncle Paul, he came up, and one night I had stayed up till I don't know 11:30 midnight, and I didn't get up in time. Um, he gets there, and then he honks the horn. I come out. I'm in my no shoes, just whatever. I was like, I'm so sorry. I was up too late, and I'm not gonna be able to make it today. And he looks at me, and I just don't know if he really understands what this meant. He looks at me and smiles and just said, "That's all right. Just give me a call next time. Here's my number. Give me a call next time if you can't make it." Smile on his face, pulls out, and that stuck with me so. I mean, just it was love because that's respectfully, it's just not the way I expect it to handle because it's not how my dad would have handled that, right? And it just showed love. It was absolute love. Well, that happened again. I was up late one night and I got up. I'm like, oh man, and I look at the clock. And I'm like, I can't. It's too late. I can't call him. I gotta just, I gotta do this. I get a shower, I get dressed. I'm sleepy, and before the days of drinking coffee, and he picks me up. I get in the truck, and yeah, I'm kind of tired, but yeah, I didn't have time to call you. He's that tired? You'll be all right. And we get down to church, and we're going on, and just to kind of fill this in, I think I've touched on this before different times. The pastor of this church, the church was called Agape, and his name is David Businger. He's still a pastor of a church down in Missouri, I believe, today. But he was a true Pentecost preacher. He was a preacher. If you fell asleep in his service, in his meeting, I don't know how you did it, but I did it, or I was doing it that particular morning. I'm going along, and I'm listening, and praise and worship was good, the song service was good, and so forth. And he's preaching along, and I mean, he is preaching hard, and I'm sitting there just doing this number, falling asleep. And as we're going along, he's preaching, and all I can tell you, it was a God moment, is all of a sudden, I'm sitting here like this, and all of a sudden within me, I basically hear, and I will not over dramatize it. I hear within me this just wake up, and I'm like this, and I do this number. I'm like, what's going on? That's all I heard. It's just wake up, like someone literally just shook me like this, and it was to hear, are not angels ministering spirits sent for those who will inherit the kingdom of God. I wake up astutely in time to hear him telling the gospel, but there's one point I'd never actually heard. that part where it says, where Jesus said, the only sign that will be given to you will be the sign of the prophet Jonah. 3 days in the belly of the earth I will stay. I always understood that Jesus died for me, but I always thought he went straight to heaven. He didn't. Nobody wants to go to hell. Nobody wants to go to hell. You read any account of a near-death experience, and everybody will tell you, even devout atheists, the feelings that they have, the hopelessness, the lostness, the dark, the smells, the everything. Read any of them. Listen to any of them. Nobody wants to go. But then I heard that Jesus volunteered to not only die for me, but to take my place in hell for me. And at that moment, bam, I knew what happened in here. I literally passed from death into life. It was the true confession of Christ because I knew the total price that he paid. It wasn't just dying. It wasn't just laying down his life. It's what he did for me in full. He took my punishment, the full. So from there, I'm born again. I'm saved. I knew what happened. And from there, in closing on this one here, God began to show me more things. It was the first time in that church. Nothing taken away from my grandfather's church, but again, I was 8 years of age when he passed, right? So there wasn't a lot of opportunity there to see certain things. But I would begin to feel and to see the power of God. I heard for the first time in a congregational type setting a prophecy where God's speaking through his people. The first time I saw a healing line. We were in church one morning, and all of a sudden, now I'm 6'2". By this time, I'm 6'1" at least at that time. All of a sudden, the service gets interrupted, and I'm sitting about 12, 13 rows back, something like that, on the far left. Why I'm sitting that far back, I have no idea, but I'm sitting that far back. And all of a sudden, I would see, during the music service going on, apparently pastor called for a line of people who wanted to be, who wanted a fresh touch of God in their life or a healing. I don't really know what it was, to be honest with you. All I know is there was a line of people. And it's in the middle of the service, right? We're supposed to go till noon. It's no later than 11. We started about 10, went to about noonish. But 11 o'clock in the morning, he has a line of people up there, and I'm watching him. He's going around, he's praying for people, and all of a sudden I'm seeing people just falling backwards. Thump, 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 thump. And I'm just, of course, when you're talking about it, you're seeing it in your memory. And I remember seeing that. I'm like, I don't know what that is, but I want that. Whatever that is. Because I just saw it and I'm just in love with it. I didn't even understand it. It wasn't a power thing. It was a thing of knowing that God was moving. And I knew, just like I was when I was 7 and 8, I didn't know what it was. All I knew is I wanted what it was. I didn't know what that was, but I knew I wanted what that was. And it created that healthy hunger for God, for the actual supernatural part of God, who God is. You cannot have God without having the supernatural element of Him. Um, so, um, from that, we will take a break on this. You'll see the next episode tomorrow. Um, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching it. And I pray it's a blessing to you. And just knowing who Doug Ravi is of the Tenemy IL. So, blessings to you. We'll see you tomorrow.